one of the greatest battles in history. You ask, what is our policy? I will say it is to wage war by sea, land, and air, with all our might, and with all the strength that God can give us, to wage war against a monstrous tyranny never surpassed in the dark and lamentable catalogue of human crime. That is our policy.
All right. We're stopping by the war room here at Paradox Interactive and Paradox Development Studio to find out a little bit more about a game you announced just last week, Hearts of Iron 4, and let's start from the beginning. Hearts of Iron 3. It feels like it's been an eternity. It's just been a number of years here. But what do you feel about that game now, today?
Well, I think we did a lot of cool things with it, but it's starting to kind of show its age now, and it's people kind of been begging for a sequel for a couple of years, and finally get to do it now, and it's going to be pretty exciting.
So if you compare the game where it started and with when it was the expansion had been added on, where do you think you took that journey? Sort of how would you say it was from day one until the Hearts of Iron 3 that's out there today?
Well, a lot of the things in the expansions was mainly additions, new features and stuff, and which kind of will be retaining now in the sequel. A lot of the focus was also on kind of focusing in more on the historical flavor. It started off as more of a sandbox game and moved towards more of a historical simulation kind of game. This time we're going to be focusing a little bit more on the freedom of the player and a little bit more on the sandbox aspect, but kind of designing it to support both from the start. Okay,
so I would assume that but it's always founded in sort of history, of course. And is there still stuff to dig up about World War II that you feel like, oh, why didn't we include this in the last?
There's a ton of stuff. A lot of things that could, kind of simple things that could have totally changed the course of the war. I mean, there were several situations before the invasion of Poland where both France, Britain, and Russia could have had an early alliance. But for several reasons, they did not accept Russia's offer. And if that would have happened, you would have had a very different war.
So I can imagine that you have a lot of discussions in the office about these kind of possible scenarios and how likely they are and what kind of things would have to be there to trigger them. Can you talk us through any of that, or like what's going on here, and who has to say on what's a plausible scenario?
Well, a lot of things that do happen, I guess, were not so likely too. But so you have to kind of, usually when we do this kind of thing, we'll try and decide roughly how is this a 10% chance or is this a 50% chance? Generally, if it's something like an historical thing that actually happened, we kind of put more weight on it, even if it was pretty unlikely. People will kind of expect it to happen more often. So, for example, like the example I said, we say an alliance with Russia would probably be kind of low, maybe like 10-15% chance, something like that.
And then the German player would be
much more problems, yes.
All right. So, I as far as I understand it, a lot has happened on the superficial sort of level. The map looks a lot different. Can you tell us a little bit about what's changed with the map when you sort of first look at it?
Well, it's not only that it looks nicer, which is nice, but one of the things that I thought was most important with this was to have as much as you could into one map mode, like for the player to be able to make all the like tactical and strategic war decisions. He needs to really have a lot of information. In Hearts of Iron 3 and 2, you kind of need to go through several map modes. You had to like switch on weather map mode, you had to switch on terrain map mode, diplomacy, kind of switch around. Now we kind of made a new way to incorporate all these map modes into one pretty much. So you'll always kind of have all the information you need at the same time. You can see directly if there's mud in the next province before you can enter it and get stuck, that kind of stuff.
So I understand that weather plays and seasons and even time of day plays a part in sort of combat and movements.
Yeah, you can see time of day now on the map as well. Before it was only like in the minimap, and it was very hard to do kind of like exact decisions based on it. now you can say you can kind of see dawn coming. You can kind of time your attack just when dawn strikes, or say if you're kind of focusing on something like Japanese infiltration tactics, you might want to like start your attack while it's still dark, that kind of stuff. You get special bonuses. Same thing with like night versus day bombing. It's kind of two very different tracks. Some countries went with very armored aircraft and kind of could bomb during the day, and some went with kind of more technically advanced, maybe going through the night and bombing and not having to have escorts. So there's a lot of kind of big decisions that plays into the weather and the time of day and that kind of stuff.
It's not just for map effects.
No, definitely not.
So
I'd say that the weather is probably as big of an enemy as like the enemy could be, or an ally, depending on, you know, if it's...
I think history proved that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I've heard a buzzword, something that I heard you were very excited about, battle plans. Can you tell us a little bit what that's all about?
Yeah, battle plans is probably our, like, I would say, biggest feature and the biggest change from the previous game. So what it is basically is we want the player to be able to kind of feel like a real general, and that means instead of like moving each individual little unit and kind of waiting on that, you can draw up these big complex plans, or well, you can keep them small and simple too if you want. But you have the power to kind of draw up a huge plan, and it looks a lot like basically what you'll be looking at, like old newsreels or maps from World War II. And it's really intuitive way of controlling a lot of units at once without kind of making it very micro-intensive.
So it's, but how does it sort of, can you keep these and use them several times, or do you use draw one up for each?
Well, generally you probably don't want to use them several times, because once you start, it's kind of, you're already through the plan. But you can kind of send other people along in the same plan if you just want them to follow up the front line. But you'll be able to share them in multiplayer and kind of discuss with allies, and maybe even steal them from enemies. So you can kind of, you know, if you get lucky, you might steal the plan while the Germans are preparing the invasion of Barbarossa, for example. And you know, you can kind of see, oh, they're going to be focusing here, and you can try and build your defense plan based on that.
And then it's not like you get a +1 for defense or anything. It's that
No,
you actually have to adapt
it's
to
about, you know, figuring out where they're going to focus most of their strength and that kind of stuff.
Interesting. So it's still pretty early days, I assume, in development. Can you tell us a little bit where you're at and sort of what's going on right now? Are you playing the game in the office?
Well, it's still too early to play. We have several kind of larger parts that are not done yet. We've mostly been working on the land combat and that kind of stuff, and the technology trees. We haven't really started on naval and air warfare yet, so you kind of need those to play a complete game at the office. So release isn't until early 2015, so there's still a lot to go for us.
Are there anything that you're taking from the development of EU and CK that you're bringing into Hearts of Iron now, because they've been kind of a big deal?
Yeah, the biggest thing is probably like the way we design interfaces and think now. There's a lot more focus on actually like having very good interfaces, so you don't have to struggle with them and pause too much. Basically just make it really smooth interfaces without actually kind of dumbing down the game or having to remove features, because there's, you know, you just make better interfaces. And we have a lot of lessons from CK2 and EU4 with that kind of stuff. And so I'm kind of hoping we can do the same thing for Hearts of Iron that we did for EU3 to EU4, and just kind of keep the same kind of interesting complexity and make the interface so much better.
Right. Early 2015?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much for your time.
You ask, what is our aim? Victory. Victory at all costs. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory however long and hard the road may be. For without victory there is no survival.